This is not just a coaching carousel here in 2021. This is a high-powered coaching carousel. Brian Kelly, LSU, how does that strike you? We got Ben Belden here and also Nathan Erbach. You can join them on our Notre Dame post-game show here, The Voice of College Football. Also catch Nathan on his podcast, Golden Homers. We reeled these two in to give us insight into the Notre Dame situation and Brian Kelly. Hey, guys, how you doing tonight?
I don't know yet.
Interesting Notre Dame fan.
It's a loaded question. How does Brian Kelly to LSU strike you?
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh man, Mark and I were just talking off the air about how it doesn't feel like it's the most normal fit in the world. A guy from New England with Midwestern and New England ties going to the deep South to coach LSU. That seems a little strange, but I don't know. There's always been rumors here and there when Brian Kelly has struggled that he's going to take over these programs that are quote unquote easier to win at than Notre Dame. So from a lot of from a lot of standpoints, it's not that much of a surprise. The biggest part of the surprise for me is that it just came on so quickly. The reports are that Brian Kelly was out recruiting as this broke. So I don't know. It's weird. There's a lot of weird things going on. I don't necessarily know that I have all the answers to them.
Yeah, I don't. I think first and foremost, and I tweeted this out earlier before the news broke when it was sort of being thrown out there. I think the biggest thing is that this is a much different job than when Brian Kelly took it over. So from that standpoint, I'm not upset like some Notre Dame fans and even analysts have shown on Twitter platforms or the social media platforms and on message boards and stuff like that tonight. I think Notre Dame's going to hire someone very good, well-respected, and someone that's going to lead the program. And, maybe there'll be a tiny hiccup or two along the way, because I think that's always expected. Maybe the recruiting class doesn't fully stick together, which I think is important to note as well, regardless of who they hire. But at the same time, I think that just the program itself is in such a healthy place that, Notre Dame's going to be fine in the end. In regards to Kelly leaving for LSU, a lot of what Ben said, I echo. I never would have thought he would have left for the South. Being a New England guy, coaching where he coached previously to Notre Dame. I think he's also somewhat fairly close to retirement, to be completely honest with you. And I know, like, just reading some LSU message boards earlier, a lot of them shared that same thought process that Brian Kelly is a terrific coach in general, but how long exactly is he going to be a head coach? But the one thing I do not blame Kelly for is essentially setting him and his kids up and their kids up for down the line. Because I do think Notre Dame, no matter who, no matter what they would have offered, would not have been what LSU was offering. And it's just not the way they run things. And it's, people can say that's Notre Dame or not. I don't know. But it's hard to blame someone who takes that amount of money when he's essentially going to make probably double what he was at Notre Dame.
And so there's no reason to believe that Brian Kelly and Notre Dame had a strained relationship in any such way.
I don't.
Sorry,
we believe everything was fine, right?
Yeah, I don't think that there was any bad blood there. I mean, and I don't think. I mean, I don't want to speak for Nathan, but I don't think that that's really ever been something that's been talked about. Now, is he frustrated behind the scenes about, maybe not being able to recruit this kid or that kid or whatever? That's probably the extent to which I would go. But as far as bad blood goes, I think that honestly, Jack Swarbrick and Brian Kelly had a great relationship. I mean, Swarbrick could have probably fired him a time or two, and that would have been understandable at the time. So no, I don't think that I don't think that there's bad blood there. I'll let Nathan kind of weigh in on that part.
I think there's bad blood now. I do not think there's bad. Yeah, I don't think there was bad blood previously. Again, to echo a lot of what Ben said, I don't think this was necessarily about recruiting and the idea that Notre Dame can't win a national championship. If anything, I think bringing in Marcus Freeman as a defensive coordinator and seeing what he's done on the recruiting trail this cycle specifically, and for 2023, it shows that Notre Dame can absolutely compete for a national title. So I don't really think it had to do with that. I think it had to do with money, B, resources, and C, the idea that, C, and kind of piggybacking off of B, resources, not only in the sense that he can give money to his assistant coaches, which I think is a big selling point, but also facility upgrades and things like that. Notre Dame has done a pretty good job of upgrading their facilities over the last few seasons. I mean, I was just on Notre Dame's campus a few weeks ago. I mean, their facilities are, I don't want to say second to none, but they're up there. But the SEC is a different animal when it comes to that kind of stuff. And again, I know there's some comments rolling in that, what does LSU have that Notre Dame doesn't? I'm not convinced that Notre Dame can't get to that level per se, but the SEC has shown that they're more willing to provide resources for that to happen, and Notre Dame hasn't.
So on the flip side of the argument that he goes to LSU and he's provided with everything he could possibly want to build a championship team, he also has to knock heads with Nick Saban and soon to be, Texas and Oklahoma, but Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, and others in the SEC, and the path is going to be that much tougher than what he's experienced at Notre Dame, even though they schedule difficult at Notre Dame. The ACC contract, I think, has lightened the load in recent years. So there's that end of it as well. Maybe you're in a better position to win and recruit a certain level of athlete. Maybe, as you guys are outlining, that's been done at Notre Dame in recent years, thanks to Brian Kelly. But on the flip side, the path of resistance seems to have been ratcheted up considerably.
Yeah, no, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, people want coaches I think coaches are drawn to the SEC partly because they can win national championships and recruit at a higher level than most programs. But at the same time, like you said, I mean, you got to go through Nick Saban. You got to go through whoever Florida's going to end up hiring because, they'll probably get back at some point. You got to go through, Texas A&M, who's recruiting at a high level now. You have to go through Georgia, who is playing unbelievable football this season. And then you can name several other schools in the SEC that have the potential, to get to that level as well. And then not only that, but, Clemson's probably going to be back. USC could end up being a much better program here soon. So there's going to be a lot of other schools, and I'm sure Notre Dame will be right up there. But you could argue that someone like Lincoln Riley going from OU, who's going to end up in the SEC, going to USC might dominate the Pac-12 for years to come and have a much easier time getting to the college football playoff.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as we've been talking, I kind of thought, it almost seemed like about every other year since USC has had so many different coaching changes over, Brian Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame that, there was the rumor that would Brian Kelly ever take the USC job? I think that would have been something that I would have thought, given what Lincoln Riley just did. I always thought that it would be more likely he would take a job like USC, even though that they're Notre Dame's, biggest rival. I mean, depending on who you ask, I guess. But I don't know. I'm still stuck on kind of the first question. It's just weird to see Brian Kelly go to the South, go to a place where, it sort of seems like he maybe just made his road to the national championship a little bit more difficult. And I almost just wonder, to finish that thought, I almost just wonder, did he just get bored? Did he just get bored at Notre Dame and decide, well, I'm not going to win a national championship here, so let me go try somewhere else? Because, and certainly there's the money aspect. I mean, $100 million is a whole lot of money. But yeah, and I think that was a great point by Nathan about being able to pay his assistant coaches. I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, you saw that with Mike Elko a couple years back. Texas A&M just kind of came and threw a whole bunch of money at him, and next thing you know, he's at A&M under Jimbo Fisher. So yeah, I think that's a great point about about the assistant coaching thing. He'd like to be able to retain those guys. He maybe even probably was starting to feel like, oh my gosh, how much longer is Marcus Freeman going to be here? And I wonder if that had anything to do with that. But Like I say, I'm still stuck on this. This is just weird. It's just weird.
I'm stuck on that too, because Brian Kelly just does not strike me as an LSU head coach. And if you go through the coaches in the FCC, both current and former, most of them, the great majority, are from the footprint of the SEC, both in regards to where they grew up and where they have coached and gained their experience. Now, there are exceptions, Lou Holtz being one, of course, coached at South Carolina at the end of his career. So we make that Notre Dame connection there. But yeah, Brian Kelly, just the whole vibe, the whole attitude, the whole approach, the way he talks, the way he just his mannerisms, everything just does not speak to me the next Les Miles Ed Ogeron. And maybe that's what they're going for. We've had enough of those knuckleheads run our program off the rails, off the field. Maybe we need somebody who's going to gain a little bit more respect with these athletes and with people off the field, as well as doing the right things to win championships on the field.
Yeah, I kind of echoing a lot of those thoughts, Mark. I know I've said that word a lot here already, but that's really what surprised me about it. You know, Brian Kelly leaving or bolting for like a really, really good NFL head coaching job wouldn't have surprised me at some point. I will say I was starting to get to the point where I felt like it was going to be, you know, eventually Kelly just retires at Notre Dame. That's just how I had the feeling of that. You know, he's kind of always had this vibe of someone who doesn't want to coach into his 70s. And, you know, he's already 60 years old. So, I mean, is he going to be at LSU for 10 years? I doubt it. But just the idea that, you know, and then on top of that, like, it's not even necessarily that doesn't strike me as an LSU coach. He doesn't strike me as someone who wants to deal with what the SEC brings. And that's not an insult to the SEC. It's a great style of football. It's the best football conference, you know, for all intent and purposes. But it's just like, that's not his vibe. And it doesn't mean that he won't be successful there. Like you said, I mean, maybe that's what LSU was looking for overall. But I just don't know. I mean, he's not. People aren't going to want to hear this because obviously I'm a Notre Dame fan, Notre Dame analyst. But like the throwing money at recruits, that's always seems to be rumored in the SEC, and just some of the boosters that are always wanting to have their ear and everything. It just seems like it's not very Kelly-like. You know, he's more of a CEO type of head coach, or at least that's what he's become since 2016. And I don't know if that's if he's gonna like that at LSU, but we'll find out. Money talks too, so I think that's an important part to discuss here.
Ben, you let us know how much time you have, because I'll certainly let you talk as much as you would like to before you got to head on out. So
I got plenty of time, Mark.
So in regards to the situation with Notre Dame, this also strikes me odd, and it's certainly not a probability that Notre Dame makes the college football playoff, but it's a possibility, and it's a stronger possibility than it's been for probably most of the season after the loss to Cincinnati. Can we in some way imagine Brian Kelly taking an LSU job, and we're going to get an announcement in 5 days on Sunday after the conference championship games who the final four are ticketed to the playoffs? And if that includes Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, no Brian Kelly. I don't know, Ben, what the decision would be made there.
I mean, I think the precedent has been set that, you know, Brian Kelly, you know, when he was at Cincinnati, he was, you know, had his team in the Sugar Bowl and obviously didn't coach in that game. I can't see that anybody at Notre Dame wants him to coach that game, the athletes included, to be honest. I mean, if you look down through the Twitter feed, at the very least, you know, nobody's necessarily saying like, man, I'm mad about this, but everybody's like, wow. Like, and you don't just weigh in, you know, if you're feeling really great about things, I guess. So no, I don't, regardless of what happens with Notre Dame, Brian Kelly has coached his last practice, his last game, however you want to look at it. Notre Dame, you know, I think everybody would feel pretty fine if, you know, Marcus Freeman or even Mike Elston, who's been at Notre Dame forever, you know, was the interim head coach for whatever Notre Dame has left this season.
Yeah, no, especially with the way it ended. I mean, there's a bunch of reports coming out that this was totally blindsided by the staff. I mean, you have stuff coming out that there was a coach, one of Notre Dame's coaches, it wasn't named who, but he was inside of a recruit's home on an in-home visit, and then boom, he gets a text right when he leaves the house, and he had no idea. So, I mean, some of those reports are probably, you know, are fabricated to an extent, but I really don't think this was expected. One thing I will say though, I'm not as surprised about Kelly leaving as some are. I know we talked about this a little bit. I mean, it's more so the LSU thing. I mean, someone mentioned this in the comments, and I don't think that this is necessarily a part of it, but he did slip up and say that he wants Marcus Freeman to be the next Notre Dame head coach, just a couple months ago. There were a couple reports when he was first hired. I don't think it's actually the case, but there were a couple reports when he was first hired that one of the reasons he chose Notre Dame over LSU as the defensive coordinator was that Notre Dame was possibly going to promise him the head coaching job when Kelly left. So whether Kelly was giving Notre Dame hints or not that he might be leaving, might be retiring, it just wasn't too shocking. We've heard things over the last couple of years that it could be Kelly could be done at Notre Dame. And like I said, retiring was probably the likelihood that we thought it was, or the most likely case from our standpoint, and not, going to LSU or anybody else. But this seems to be adding up to where Notre Dame was blindsided, but at the same time wasn't 100% surprised, if that makes any sense.
So here's a question for everybody in the chat. You can leave your answer if you can come up with any, because I know the history of college football pretty well, and Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma for USC is the first blue blood to blue blood job transition I can remember anywhere, and nobody respond with Nick Saban, Michigan State, LSU. Nobody respond with Brett Bielema, Arkansas, Wisconsin. Those are some of the other responses I got on some other live streams. Those do not count. They don't qualify. The closest I could come was Mark Richt from Georgia to Miami, and I'm talking consecutive seasons, because otherwise Nick Saban's move from LSU to Alabama was separated, of course, by an NFL job for 2 years. Urban Meyer, Florida, Ohio State, that was a year off, so not back-to-back years. So this is unprecedented what Lincoln Riley is doing, and then we can have a debate about LSU as a blue blood job. I think it's on the cusp. From a traditional standpoint, probably not. But this is just unprecedented. These coaches moving from power job to power job, elite position to elite position. And maybe I'm dating myself here, but I would have never thought years ago, not that many years ago, that a coach would leave Notre Dame for any college job, let alone LSU, would not be one of the 5 or 6 or 7 that would have been listed to be a departure spot.
Go ahead, Ben.
It just wouldn't be.
But
yeah, times have changed.
I was, and I can't remember the exact comment that I was reading as this all broke, but like, how many guys can you think of that have left Notre Dame on their own accord? I mean, there's really not that many. I mean, over the course of the last 20, 30 years, I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, Notre Dame's just not a place generally where you leave, unless it's, you're run out of town or whatever. Brian Kelly was at the peak of what we thought was going to be something very special, on the verge of maybe his best Notre Dame teams ever, and then he leaves. And the said, that kind of adds to the I don't know what the word is, but the shock of it all. So, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. I don't need to get into a debate about, how good of a job is Notre Dame or any of that type of stuff. But I mean, it's a pretty darn good job. And, I don't know. Again, I'm at a loss for words because this is just also strange to me. But, Notre Dame is Notre Dame at the end of the day. And, Nathan referenced this earlier that, they're going to bounce back in some way or another. And it's just going to be interesting to see how it is.
So are Notre Dame fans more put off by our coaches leaving? That's a slap in the face. Are you kidding me that he would leave, as I just mentioned, for any other job in college football? Or we like Brian Kelly, whether that be as a person, probably not so much. And I hate to criticize Brian Kelly, but he hasn't necessarily been the most endearing individual on the college football scene, but more from a standpoint of he's a really good coach and we want to keep him. Is it more the latter or the former? Losing Kelly upsets Notre Dame fans because they want him to be their head coach, or they feel slighted that somebody would leave Notre Dame for another job, Nathan?
I think it's more the latter. I think it has to. I mean, we can argue all we want if Notre Dame versus LSU is a better job. I mean, I think LSU has just as much reason to compete for national championships. They've shown that. They've done it in the last few years when they had everything work together for them. So I mean, the LSU probably recruits better than Notre Dame when they have the head coaching, like a Brian Kelly or whoever. With that said, it echoes a lot of what you guys said. I mean, Notre Dame doesn't lose coaches. Sometimes they lose out on coaches, like Urban Meyer. There was a lot of rumors when he was coming from Utah, he'd end up at Notre Dame. He ends up going to Florida instead, and then, ends up at Ohio State, and never ends up at Notre Dame, which most people thought he would. That has happened. They have lost coaches from that standpoint. What they don't do is when they bring a guy in and he's successful, like Brian Kelly was, like Lou Holtz was, and so on and so forth, going back to the start of college football. They don't lose guys to equal or better programs, even if you want to throw that word out there. But I think the other thing that bugs Notre Dame fans more than anything is that it's right on the cusp of a possible second college football playoff in a row and third in 4 years. Doesn't mean that Notre Dame's going to go win the national championship this year. It doesn't mean that they're really any closer to winning the national championship than LSU per se. But the idea that Kelly leaves in the middle of a possible playoff run, and then if they don't make the playoff, they're still going to end up in the Fiesta or the Peach Bowl. And I know, that those aren't really big bowl games anymore unless they're in the playoff, because kids are going to sit out and so on and so forth. But they're still New Year's Six bowls, and Notre Dame is coming off of 5 straight years of 10 plus seasons. Multiple years of 11 or 12 wins. And I think that's what shocks people more than anything, that this wasn't something that was maybe after the bowl game or after it was decided if Notre Dame was going to be in the college football playoff or not.
Got Ben Belden here. We got Nathan Erbach.
Yeah, to add on to that,
well. Go ahead,
I think the fact that Brian Kelly.
My apologies. There was a delay there, so I didn't know that you had started. Go ahead.
We might have lost Ben.
Might have lost Ben. Ben, join us again. Ben's frozen with that look of shock and awe on his face about Brian Kelly's decision to go to LSU. So that brings us to the next coach at Notre Dame, Nathan. You haven't had much time to digest all of this, but do any particular names come to mind that are reasonable requests?
Yeah, I think the two that make the most sense, and probably I think it's actually what's going to end up happening, is either Luke Fickell at Cincinnati or Marcus Freeman, the current defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Obviously Luke Fickell has said on multiple occasions in reality that either Notre Dame or Ohio State is really the job he would look for to move from Cincinnati. And I think he's proven that. I think he's probably been offered or at least been in high consideration for a lot of other jobs, probably even including the USC and LSU jobs this year, and maybe politely turn them down. And then with Freeman, there's a couple things. I mean, obviously he had the respect of the current head coach, or the former head coach, in Brian Kelly, which I still think will go a long ways with Jack Swarbrick and the other decision makers at Notre Dame, and the idea that he's a young guy that could build something very strong. And the idea, and also the fact that he's brought, kind of a fresh recruiting pitch to Notre Dame that other coaches didn't bring. And I think that that's going to resonate not only with recruits and families and stuff like that, but also in his coaching staff. I think if your head coach is a recruiting dog on the trail, the rest of your recruiting staff and your coaching staff will also be dogs on the trail. And that's one thing that Kelly was sort of, ridiculed for a little bit at Notre Dame, is that he didn't have that mentality to be a top-notch recruiter. And some of the staff that he's brought in, like Marcus Freeman and Mike Elston and Tommy Reese even, are more like that as recruiters. So I would be very surprised as of right now if it's not Marcus Freeman or Luke Fickell. And I actually am starting to lean towards Marcus Freeman. But before Ben kind of mentions a few names, since he didn't really hear what we were saying, just a few other names that wouldn't necessarily surprise me if they were in the mix. John Harbaugh at Baltimore, if that was ever a job that he thought about leaving and wanted to get into the coaching ranks, maybe face off against his brother. His daughter goes to Notre Dame, is on the lacrosse team. That's always been somewhat of a rumor. Bob Stoops, the same thing, if he doesn't end up somehow taking the OU job, which I don't think he's going to get anyway. I don't think Matt Campbell, to be honest with you, is really a serious candidate. I think they like Luke Fickell and would probably hire Marcus Freeman more, so I wouldn't really put his name in the ring. And I'm sure there's going to be some other names that pop up. I know that Braum at Purdue has always been someone that people have mentioned for the Notre Dame gig. I think he would do really well there as an offensive quarterback guru, and I think he is another guy that's really strong on the recruiting trail. I just don't know if you can sell that right now with how, he's won some big games at Purdue, but he's been there for 4 years now or so, and what have they really done outside of going like 6-6, 7-5 or worse? But I do think he's a guy that would be better at that at a Notre Dame, obviously. But yeah, I think it really comes down to probably Luke Fickell or Marcus Freeman when all said and done.
Ben, Nathan pretty much covered the coaching gamut in regards to reasonable candidates. I know you didn't catch all of that, but anyone else that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, the only other name that I'd potentially maybe throw in there, and this was rumored, when Brian Kelly was struggling, if you fire Brian Kelly, who do you get? I mean, it's PJ Fleck. I know that that's a name that a lot of people really liked, around 2016. Kind of the same thing that Nathan said about Braum, though. I mean, really, what has he, besides being an exciting guy and a probably a fun guy to play for, what really has he done in terms of accolades? I mean, Minnesota's been good, okay, but is the splash hire that you want at Notre Dame? I don't necessarily think so. So I think there's that, and then there's I threw this out on Twitter just in jest mostly, but Lane Kiffin. I mean, I don't know. Doesn't really, from a personality standpoint, doesn't necessarily fit Notre Dame. I don't think. Everybody wants to talk about Urban Meyer.
Brian Kelly left for LSU.
Exactly. That would strike me the same exact way. Exactly.
Yes.
Another name that I didn't think is Matt Rule with the Panthers. When he was at Temple and even at Baylor, there was always rumors of him going to Notre Dame, possibly if that job opened up. And I wouldn't be surprised if he felt like Notre Dame was a better job than the Carolina Panthers overall. So that'd be another name I'd look out for if Fleck somehow turned them down and Notre Dame didn't want to hire a coordinator. But yeah, I mean, I know someone mentioned that John Harbaugh is not a serious candidate. I was just throwing that name out there because there's been rumors. I'm not saying he's a serious candidate, but Baltimore's having his, who knows if Baltimore wants to move on or if he's decided he's done with the NFL. I don't know. But if he did leave for any job, I would say Notre Dame would probably be the job, is all I was really getting at.
Ben mentioned Urban Meyer, and I know that he said way, way back in his career that the two jobs that he wanted were Ohio State and Notre Dame. So, and he seems like a guy that cares about legacy, which just about everybody does. That's not a knock on Urban Meyer, but just to continue a 3 national championship legacy. And actually, ironically, the only 2 coaches in history who have a better record than Urban Meyer are in black and white photos at Notre Dame. I believe that's Newt Rockne and Frank Leahy. So he's got the best record in college football post World War II. So from a legacy standpoint and tradition and being the purist that he is from a college football standpoint, certainly I guess he would covet the job. And yes, I did say from a college football standpoint. BGO Football Funk here says the LSU job's better. Thank you so much for the super chat contribution. We appreciate that. We got Nathan Erbach and we got Ben Belden here, and they do a heck of a job on Notre Dame post game for us here at the Voice of College Football after every Notre Dame game. So that will be a college football playoff appearance or a bowl game in a New Year's Six game. So join them then. So our guy BGPO Football Fun comes back with Johnny Heisman from Clemson to Georgia Tech. Oh, he's answering my question and he's going like dark ages on me. Okay. Yes, Georgia Tech has a elite program circa 1920. Got it. All right. Okay.
I think your point's very valid. It's very rare to see a coach go from a blue blood to a blue blood. And I'm okay with calling LSU a blue blood in the sense that I think it's a top 10 job.
Yeah.
just like Notre Dame is. So that is rare. Same with Lincoln Riley to USC. You rarely see that, and the fact that you saw it in 2 days or consecutive days, ironically both affecting Notre Dame to an extent, is crazy to me.
Dave, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Appreciate that so much. The Notre Dame fan in me is happy that Brian Kelly is leaving as a coach. He was great. I couldn't stand him as a person. The Minnesota fan in me is hoping it's not PJ. So, yeah, I believe that's a Minnesota Dave who calls us from time to time, and he is the very frequent, you hear this all over the place, the dual Minnesota Notre Dame football fan. However that occurred, he's told me, but I don't remember. All right, let's see. I think that's pretty much wrapped it up from the super chat standpoint. We appreciate that so much. Man, I had about 18 other questions in my head, but I've lost track of them at this point.
I will say about PJ.
Yeah, go to it.
I'm kind of with Ben on that one. Yeah, I've never really seen it with Fleck. I mean, I think early on there was some smoke there with Minnesota. I think he's kind of an interesting cat for a lot, for all intent and purposes. But I don't want to say anything's impossible these days. I mean, I think we've seen that within the last couple of days. Like I mentioned, that it's just you never know. But Fleck to me doesn't seem even like a Notre Dame guy. I think he would rub people in that organization the wrong way a little bit, or in that university the wrong way. So I would find it hard, like in an interview. Like let's just say they interviewed him tomorrow. I think he would. I don't think Jack Sporbrook. I think it would just be a weird dynamic. And so someone like him, like whether or not he would be successful there, I think is besides the point. I just don't think he would ever have the opportunity.
He may bring the boat prop with him in the office with the oars, actually bring it all with him. It's kind of a symbolism there. See, I'm a PJ Fleck guy. I'm a fan of PJ Fleck, but I totally get if he turns other people off. It's one of those things where you really can't put your finger on it. Some people are like that, and you like them, they kind of click, and other guys they're pretty much the same guy, but for some reason they rub you the wrong way. And it's really not explained. And of course, I've never met the man. I'm just going off documentaries and hearing all the interviews and news conferences and the aura around him. And it seems to be pretty genuine, actually, even though it doesn't seem that way at first glance. We are busting our tails to get as much college football coverage to you. We're all over the Lincoln Riley thing. So check out all our videos and live streams there. Darn you, Brian Kelly. While I got this news and heard from Nathan and Ben, I was posting a video on Billy Napier going to Florida. So you'll have to wait on that, but that's coming out very soon as well here in the next couple hours.
There's some interesting comments rolling in that are funny. So I'm laughing at some of those.
Well, if you've got a good one, throw it our way.
One guy said that Notre Dame's a top 3 independent job. That it's true. Can't argue it.
I saw that Brian Kelly's an average coach.
Not true.
No,
we should just hit some true or false with some of these.
The curve is the curve on that must be skewed to kind of one end of the spectrum. Yes, if he's a top 10 coach, but he's average, if that makes any sense, which it of course doesn't.
Ben, I have a question for you. I know you mentioned who you thought were realistic hires, and I don't think you heard my like who I want. Maybe I didn't even really mention for sure who I wanted, but is there a guy that you would specifically prefer over the others that seem realistic at this point?
Well, I think my initial, and I actually had a buddy who's a USC fan who texted me, I got the notifications kind of like simultaneously on my phone that, one from Bleacher Report or whatever, that Brian Kelly was leaving. And then a text from him that said, Luke Fickell is your next head coach. And this is a guy who wanted Luke Fickell to be, potentially the coach at USC, I might add. So, that was kind of my knee jerk type of reaction. Obviously the thing that all Notre Dame fans were saying was Marcus Freeman. And so, I spent the better part of the last couple hours thinking, Luke Fickell, Marcus Freeman, could they do it both together? I think if you end up with Luke Fickell as your coach, you lose Marcus Freeman. I know they're good friends. I know that they're, I believe Luke Fickell is, the godfather to one of Marcus Freeman's kids, or maybe it was the other way around. Very close from their time in Cincinnati. Let's put it that way. But I don't think that Marcus Freeman wants to, go back and be an assistant to Luke Fickell again. I don't know. It would seem weird. And why was it really something
for Cincinnati? I think it's mostly because Cincinnati would hire him on the spot to be their head coach.
Right. Right. So, yeah. And so, yeah, that's the other part that, Marcus Freeman could go back to Cincinnati and be the head coach. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. So, the way that Notre Dame has recruited, the way since Marcus Freeman has been here, I think I'm fully 100% on board with Marcus Freeman being the next head coach. Especially since Notre Dame's in such a stable place right now. It's not like you need somebody to come in and really change a whole awful lot from a cultural standpoint. You might argue that there's some things that you'd like to see done better or differently on one side of the football or the other, or whatever the situation is. But, Marcus Freeman strikes me as a guy that would be a great guy to devote his time completely to recruiting. Obviously, he's got his hand in all of these other places throughout the football program, but I mean, he focuses more time on recruiting and a little bit less time on some of the strategic things and signs off on some of the strategy. I think that's a great thing for him. Who knows if he wants that exactly or not, and how much, if he becomes a head coach, how he spreads himself. But I genuinely think that would be a good scenario for Notre Dame. Bring back Freeman, try to keep this recruiting class kind of in order. Bring back most of your assistant coaches. I'm sure he'll want to do some different things here and there, and let him do it as far as I'm concerned, and go from there. That's really that's what I would do.
Yeah, and I've been sort of piggybacking back and forth here, because I really do. First of all, I do think it's going to come down to Fickell or Freeman. That's just what I believe. It's what I've heard from people that are more in the know than me. It just seems that way, and it's honestly seemed that way for 3 years. if you knew Kelly was leaving in any capacity, it just felt like. I mean, maybe there were some other names. I mean, maybe before Matt Rule left for the NFL, he was another name that was involved there. But I'm struggling with it's weird. There's two sides of this. I think you get the proven NFL coach the proven head coach with Luke Fickell, who I think would keep this program where it's at. Maybe you lose some recruits in the process this year and stuff like that because it's brand new. All of these guys had second tier options that likely weren't Cincinnati. But Luke Fickell is, I think, a very good head coach and would stay at Notre Dame for a long time. I don't think he would necessarily bolt for Ohio State if Ryan Day left immediately. But that is a concern, I think, at the same time. But then the other side of it is, and it goes a lot to what you said about Marcus Freeman. Part of me just thinks Marcus Freeman has it. I know it's not traditional for Notre Dame to hire someone who's never been a head coach before, at least in recent memory. But he would keep this recruiting class and the 2023 recruiting class, together for the most part. And I think that's more important than maybe people want to realize. I know some people are like, well, forget about the recruiting classes, get the best coach. Yeah, I do agree with that. And that's where I think Luke Fickell comes in to an extent. But also Marcus Freeman has been here. I think he would keep not only the recruiting class afloat, but also the coaching staff. I think Tommy Rees would remain the offensive coordinator, which would help with the offensive recruits. I think that, Mike Elston maybe gets promoted to defensive coordinator. I think I think Kelly was hesitant to hire Mike Elston as a defensive coordinator, partly because, he didn't have his hands on the defensive side of the ball, but Freeman does. So it would still be Freeman's defense. So I don't think there would be much of a concern with Elston running the show there, because Freeman is essentially going to be the one running the show on that side of the ball. And then, like I said, it really comes down to, I think he has it. I think he's going to be a guy that you regret not hiring down the road if he ends up at, for example, Cincinnati, and then a hypothetical, again, Ryan Day leaves for the NFL in a few years, and then Marcus Freeman's all of a sudden taking the Ohio State job. So, I think it's a job that he would keep for a long time if you gave it to him. And I think that there's recruiting ramifications possibly if you don't.
Notre Dame with the number 4 class in the 2022 247 list here. And we are 3 weeks away from National Signing, 2 weeks away on Wednesday from early National Signing Day, when about 85 to 90% of the players will be signed. That's crazy good.
Yeah. I can almost guarantee you that's going to change a little bit.
Sure. But that's what Brian Kelly's leaving.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where I brought up the point earlier where, like, I think that's where Notre Dame fans are a little bit more, you know, like why they're shaking their head a little bit about it. It's not the fact that he left for an LSU style job. I mean, I can understand the money. I can understand the idea of having some lesser academic hurdles. I can understand the idea that LSU maybe has a better chance of winning a national championship like they've shown in recent years. What I don't understand is right before a college football playoff berth, you have your best recruiting class since like 2013 when they brought in Jalen Smith, just to give you an idea of who the top recruit was in that class. You just hired maybe the best defensive coordinator in college football, probably along with Dan Lanning at Georgia, and a guy that probably would have stayed with you for a few years. So that's the kind of stuff that seems odd seems a little bit more odd to me. But again, like I said, I can't blame him for leaving for money and some of the other things that he possibly left for.
Yeah. Well, I was saying this whenever my internet connection betrayed me more than Brian Kelly betrayed Notre Dame. I was in the middle of saying, I think what makes that, to piggyback off of what you're saying, Brian Kelly said all year the term transitional year, which did not imply that he had any idea that he was going to leave after the end of this year. Transitional year means, we're building this to get what we want to get in the next couple of years. I mean, just the fact that he used that terminology, I think, when you kind of take a step back and look at it from a big picture standpoint, that's what makes it hurt, because, you were starting to fantasize about what Notre Dame could look like when they bring in a guy like, and now I'm going to talk recruiting a little bit, like a CJ Williams, who I can't say is going to stay at Notre Dame now, because, Lincoln Riley just went to USC, who's in CJ Williams's backyard, and now Notre Dame lost their coach. I mean, it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to keep some of those guys, and that's the part about losing Brian Kelly that hurts the most to me. I don't know. I don't know. And so, Nathan was kind of mentioning, that, and I wholeheartedly agree, keep Marcus Freeman. You got a chance maybe to talk one of those guys into staying at Notre Dame, because, Marcus Freeman did really well recruiting on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's pretty well understood that he's branched out a little bit. I mean, I know he's the defensive coordinator, but he's had his hand in the recruiting of some of the other players as well, maybe that aren't even necessarily defensive guys. Keep that class together as best you can. And I don't necessarily think that you're looking at a Notre Dame class that is going to take a big, huge hit talent. I think they can survive it at the very least. So I don't know. I mean, man, it's on one hand, I'm hopeful for the next step of Notre Dame football, because, maybe this will end up being a blessing in disguise. I mean, I'm not a Brian Kelly hater by any means, but maybe just new blood or new ideas, or, ideas that get elevated, or however you want to put it. Maybe that's good for the program, but it does hurt in a lot of ways. So I'm definitely in a very bittersweet type of a feeling right now.
And I know there's some people that are saying that Kelly won't be able to handle the LSU fans. I don't think they've been on some Notre Dame message boards, because Notre Dame message boards can get pretty hectic at times.
Different type
I was
of
searching
insult,
all over I was searching all over the place for Brian Kelly's salary. So since he was coaching at a private school, does anyone have a good handle on what he was making?
What was the announcement for his LSU? Just it was like 7 years, 100 million, right, or something like that.
10 years.
10 years, 100 million. Okay, so only 10 million, which I think most people thought he was going to end up getting more, possibly. I can tell you, with pretty good accord that Brian Kelly was probably around 5 or 6 at Notre Dame.
Really?
Yeah, there were the way that they use their money for head coaches, it doesn't always show. So like while his salary probably showed, like, I think someone told me today his salary showed like somewhere around like 2.75 million. There were other ways from like foundations and stuff like that he was making more than that, and probably double what it shows on his resume or whatever.
But I was a bit surprised because I thought that was a bit low. There are maybe 5 to 10 coaches that were in that at least 7 to 7.5 million range, and most of them had not accomplished what Brian Kelly has.
Yeah, and I would say I'm saying it's at least 5 or 6. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 7 or 8 because of it. But there are people out there that think he's only making 3 mil, which is not correct. And I should preface that by saying 3 million is a lot of money, so we probably shouldn't complain too much about that overall.
Well, Notre Dame, they released their financials, and what is it, like 3 years in arrears, where you kind of get an idea of what coaches like Brian Kelly are making. So like 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was around that 2.75, and he's probably gotten a raise or two. And Under Armour certainly pays him quite a bit to wear their apparel and that type of stuff. They find other ways, like Nathan was saying, to compensate, even though it's not Notre Dame necessarily paying the coach. So who knows? I mean, I feel like there's a very wide range of what he could have been making, and no one knows for absolutely sure.
500 plus on the line. We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We got Nathan Erbach. We got Ben Belden. They team up for Notre Dame post game. That would be post game here at the Voice of College Football. And certainly you can catch Nathan as well on his podcast, Golden Homers. And Nathan hit on this, but we read all the super chats. So Belton Mike basically saying Brian Kelly, tends to get upset easily when challenged or questioned. Wait until LSU fans start jumping his ass.
I think he's prepared for it. And he's also, I will say, he's also the Brian Kelly of like 2011, 2012, whatever, is still out there, I think, fresh in other fans' eyes. But if you watch him on the sidelines at Notre Dame from like 2017 to now, he's very much changed his persona. He's a well-liked guy in the media room. His players love him one-on-one, which I don't think that was always necessarily the case early on. I do think he maybe had some bad blood with his players, maybe in the Cincinnati days even, but he can get away with it at that kind of program when you're winning. But he learned, maybe too slow at Notre Dame, but he eventually learned at Notre Dame that some of that stuff doesn't fly when you land, more elite recruits and more elite players and stuff like that. And, I think he's changed his overall coaching and persona, I think, quite a bit overall for the better.
Matthew Miller says, and thank you so much, Matthew, for the super chat. This week has answered the rankings of jobs in college football. The 5 best are Bama, Ohio State, USC, LSU, and Texas. People go there and they don't leave unless it's for the NFL.
Or get fired. In Texas's case.
Absolutely. Wow. So Brian Kelly to LSU, that one blindsided everyone. In this day and age of information flow and the ability to hack into just about anything and know where people are and track people and all that, it's amazing to me that nobody really picked up on this. Who knows how long they've been in talks and negotiations, and the same thing with Lincoln Riley to USC.
It's funny. Just like Kelly, I thought Lincoln Riley would end up being an NFL coach one day if he left. It feels like Bob Stoops handed him the keys to the kingdom almost, and you can argue whether or not he had been the success that people thought he would be. I mean, somewhat like Notre Dame. OU is lost in the college football playoff a decent amount of times. And he didn't get over that hurdle. So maybe he felt that USC, kind of similar to LSU, could offer him a little bit more, financially, and B, resource wise and possibly a better chance of winning a national championship. So, but again, I didn't think that Kelly or Riley would leave their respective programs unless it was for the NFL or that's pretty much it. Just the NFL for the most part.
All right. Brian Kelly to LSU one day following the news of Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma to go to USC. And then, of course, the Notre Dame job will have to be filled. And then that job will have to be filled. And the dominoes will continue to fall around college football on this coaching carousel that is unlike anything we've seen in recent years. Nathan Erbach, Golden Homers, catch his podcast right there. And also Ben Belden joins us on a regular basis to talk Notre Dame football. Guys, I'm going to reel you back in to talk about the Notre Dame replacement for Kelly, to talk about the bowl game when it's selected and or a college football playoff. And, of course, National Signing Day is just 2 weeks away, to get your take on what is a number 4 recruiting class right now that hopefully won't implode between now and December 15th. So, guys, I appreciate it. And if you have any other parting shots, certainly the floor is yours.
Well, as I've been sitting here, talking about this, thinking about this, I guess my next biggest question is, what's the timeline for Notre Dame and what they're going to do? I mean, obviously this is particularly shocking because Brian Kelly is leaving for LSU when theoretically Notre Dame could be competing in a college football playoff this year. Well, I mean, we're just talking about Notre Dame picking their replacement, and, Luke Fickell's at the top of a lot of short lists. I mean, I can't necessarily see Luke Fickell leaving before Cincinnati gets a chance at the college football playoff. I mean, they also have a conference championship game to play as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Notre Dame does. I guess, if Notre Dame's going to fill this quick, it's going to be an elevation of Marcus Freeman. If it seems to be, drug out at any point, you got to think, well, it's because they're starting to talk to guys like, Luke Fickell or, there's only a few coaches that honestly, I think that if it gets drawn out that they would be considering. I mean, certainly, is Minnesota Bowl eligible? Just to use an example. I mean, I don't think that PJ Fleck would care much about staying around for Minnesota's bowl game if it was somebody like that. Just to throw a name out there, that's not who I think it's going to be. But so I don't know. It'll be interesting. Like I say, the timeline, I think, will sort of start to tip Notre Dame's hand just a little bit. How weird would that be if, Notre Dame's hiring Luke Fickell next week and then he's no longer coaching and both of those teams are in the college football playoff? I don't know. I mean, again, not what I expect to happen, but if there's anything we've learned today, it's never say never. And who knows what craziness will ensue now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's just a parting word. I mean, I think if Freeman's the guy, it's probably going to be announced sooner rather than later, just to ensure that the recruiting class specifically and stuff can be held intact. Wouldn't be surprised if it's like someone like Fickell, though, that it's at least announced after the college football playoff is announced, not necessarily prior to or after the game, but certainly after the playoff. All the championship games and stuff like that are done and stuff, mostly because they need to interview and so on and so forth. But yeah, no, Mark, thanks for having us on as always, and looking forward to talking to you further once a coach is announced and the recruiting class is a little bit more more sealed up.
Fickell could coach the rematch in the college football playoff, this time for Notre Dame against Cincinnati in the playoff. And maybe Brian Kelly goes and coaches in place of Ed Ogeron in the Gasparilla Bowl or wherever LSU is going to head at 6-6. I'm sure he would want to do that. All right, good stuff. Nathan Erbach, Ben Belden, you guys are the best. We appreciate you being here and getting this put together so fast. So thank you so much for that, and we will catch you soon.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, everyone. The lineup tomorrow night is starting at 1:15 Eastern. We've got our Miami Hurricanes live show on the Miami channel live, 1:15 Eastern. We've got our Iowa Hawkeyes live show at 5:30 Eastern. And, of course, the Iowa Hawkeyes play in the Big Ten championship game against Michigan. So be locked into that, as well as our playoff rankings watch party at 7 o'clock Eastern time right here. So that's 1:15 Miami live on the Miami channel. Then we also have 5:30 Iowa live on the Iowa channel. And thank you so much, everybody, for pushing us past 1,000 subs on the Iowa channel. And then back here for the call-in show at 7 o'clock Eastern after we watch the rankings unveiling all together. And you know what? I forgot. 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Somebody get me out of bed. 10 o'clock Eastern, we are doing a special Oklahoma live on a Tuesday morning following their news conference today. So Oklahoma fans, college football fans, be on our Oklahoma channel bright and early at 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Central, Norman, Oklahoma time for Oklahoma Live. Again, Miami, Iowa, and the rankings watch party tomorrow night right here at the Voice of College Football. Thank you so much for all that you guys do. You guys make this platform what it is. I don't. I just bring it to you, and you guys make it go right here at the Voice of College Football. So we appreciate all the contributions. Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App if you want to circumvent and get past YouTube. Again, Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. Just search Mark Rogers TV, and we will see you all on Tuesday.